computers to generate factory output. Multiple modalities. We have now discussed a number of modalities, or human sensory channels, that interface designers routinely require users to make use of, and a couple of modalities that aren't yet used in human-computer interaction, but may one day be. Each of these has properties that make its use more or less suitable for particular kinds of function in particular kinds of situation. A design challenge that we haven't mentioned yet, however, arises when more than one sense or means of providing input to the computer is employed in an interface in a way that requires the user to use them in coordination. Several systems have been developed that allow the user to mix commands expressed in various ways. One example is MATIS, a system for finding information about air travel. The user may specify their constraints, such as origin and destination, date of travel, using a mixture of typed information, pointing with a mouse, and speech. The design challenge for such a system is to be able to correctly interpret a command expressed in a simultaneous mixture of these forms. So, the user may specify travel by speaking from here to there, while pointing at origin and destination cities with a mouse, and the system must match the occurrence of words like here with the corresponding mouse actions. Not all users are the same. As a final note, in our discussion of perception, it should be emphasized that not all of our users have the same perceptual capabilities. Graphical user interfaces are, not surprisingly, given the name, highly visual in the demands they make on users. Much of the user interface technology that is being designed for personal computers and used on the World Wide Web makes strong assumptions about the perceptual capabilities of users, and designers are therefore often excluding sections of the population whose vision, hearing, or other senses and abilities are impaired. Aside from any moral considerations about making technology accessible to all, there are good business reasons for considering access to our designs. The more people who are unable to use our designs, the more potential customers we have lost. This is especially true on the web, where a large number of potential customers will look at a site and decide whether to continue to use it on the basis of whether its design helps them to carry out their tasks easily. Sometimes, designing for inclusiveness and accessibility isn't only an ethical consideration or a matter of commercial good sense. In some cases, it is also a legal requirement. For example, in the United States, the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, requires that certain organizations and bodies, particularly governmental bodies, provide effective communication when they use the Internet to make information and services available. Specifically, this ruling notes that websites must be accessible to those using screen readers and receiving web information through auditory rather than, or, in addition to, their visual sense. Attention. The processes by which humans are able to focus on some things and filter out others to concentrate on certain mental or perceptual events and devote less mental resource to the rest are known collectively as attention. Attention is the taking possession by the mind in clear and vivid form of one out of what seem several simultaneously possible objects or trains of thought. Focalization, concentration of consciousness are of its essence. It implies a withdrawal from some things in order to deal with others. Some form of filter or selection process is required so that we can focus on only a subset of the possible mental and perceptual activities. This process of focusing is known as attention. Selective attention refers to choose a single stimulus from the many of offer on which to focus on using. Divided attention engage in a number of activities and focus on a number of things simultaneously. The selection of what to attend to may be the result of conscious deliberation or deciding to concentrate on something specific, or may arise from unconscious or involuntary responses to things that grab our attention. Much of the psychological research on attention has focused on the ways that people are able to direct their attention to particular perceptual events in their auditory experience. However, many of the points that are made and theories that have been developed can be generalized to other senses and other mental processes. The consequences of inattention. We can fail to pay attention to the appropriate thing for a number of reasons, and the consequence is likely to be that we fail to complete a task as we intended, or substitute an incorrect task instead. In general, a number of possible consequences can result from inattention. Capture error is where, through a failure to pay attention, a person carries out a more familiar task instead of a correct but less familiar one. Related to this is a memory lapse, where something is simply forgotten because we aren't paying attention. Common examples are using a photocopier but failing to remove our original document at the end, or using a vending machine but failing to take the change. A third class of attention-related problem occurs when we are simply distracted from one task by some other stimulus or task. An example, when we stop working at the computer to answer the telephone. Sometimes the distraction is unwanted and unnecessary, such as the distraction caused by blinking text on a web page, and sometimes, even if the distraction is desirable, such as an important telephone call, it creates problems when we attempt to resume the original task. A further kind of problem arises if our attention is not focused on something important. For example, we can miss the arrival of new email unless we happen to be attending to the icon that announces its arrival. Factors that affect attentional focus. As has already been said, at the core of the concept of attention is the idea that we have only a limited capacity for perceiving the world and carrying out mental and physical tasks. We therefore need to choose from the large number of competing possibilities a small number of things to concentrate on. A number of factors connected with the stimuli we receive, the way our mental apparatus processes them, and our state of mind at the time, affect the way we are able to achieve this focusing. These include the following properties of the stimulus: movement and change, color, size, intensity, number of competing stimuli, meaningfulness, emotional state. Movement and change. The human eye is able to discern great detail, but only in the central part of the visual field. In other parts of the visual field, the peripheral vision, we are not particularly good at seeing detail and color, but are very good at spotting movement and change towards which we can direct our attention. This is why it is possible to notice that something is happening out of the corner of one's eye without seeing exactly what color, size, intensity. Certain colors tend to be particularly good at attracting our attention. Similarly, if one object is physically larger, brighter, bolder, or more visually intense than surrounding ones, then it is more likely to attract attention. Number of competing stimuli. The greater the number of possible things to attend to, the less attentional resource there is to devote to each. In addition to these properties of stimuli, two factors concerning the human observer have an impact on how and where attention is directed. Meaningfulness. We are more likely to focus on things that are meaningful, or understandable, or make sense to us. One aspect of this is a phenomenon sometimes referred to as the cocktail party effect. Imagine you are at a party, or in some other situation where a crowd of people are talking. There is a constant level of background sound, yet it is possible to pick out words and threads of other conversations across the room. We are especially good at doing this if the content of the conversation is meaningful to us. For instance, if we hear our name mentioned in someone else's conversation, we can tune in and listen to what is being said. Emotional state. In a particularly stressful or pressured situation, a person's attentional capacity tends to be diminished, meaning that they are able to focus on fewer things at once. This fact may not be very significant for the design of websites and desktop systems. However, it is highly relevant for the design of systems such as aircraft, flight decks, if designers are not careful, there is a tendency to place the greatest attentional burden, for example, lots of visual tasks, to be carried out on the user at precisely the most stressful times, for example, landing the aircraft. Implications for a user interface design. In order for a user to be able to successfully use a computer system, it is imperative that they be able to direct their attention to the right thing at the right time. Design features affecting attention. Let us take as an example the design of web pages. The kind of question a designer or usability analyst should be asking is, what does the user need to focus on in order to carry out their task? Is the user's attention likely to be focused on these things? Or are there features of the design that tend to encourage them to focus elsewhere? If the user does get distracted and focus their attention elsewhere, sometimes this is unavoidable and results from events outside the user interface, such as the telephone ringing or a colleague walking into the office. Can they pick up the task again later and continue by refocusing their attention appropriately? As designers, there are a number of techniques we can use to try and ensure that users' attention will be directed towards the appropriate things for the task at hand. Flashing, motion, change. These techniques may be a powerful way to attract attention, but they can often simply be a distracting annoyance to users. See the section below on attention grabbing versus helping the user to decide. Differences in color, size, shape, intensity, and so on can be used to make some items of a display more attention-getting. For example, color can be used to segment the page into regions that help users to focus and to highlight important items. Meaningfulness and importance. Users will tend to find it easier to focus on items that are easy to understand and important to their task. Visual structure and grouping of items. Meaningful units can help the user to focus on the items that are relevant to their concerns. Simplify the choices presented to the user. Alerting mechanisms such as animations and pop-up screens should be used with care and only to provide warnings or supplementary information. Spatial cues indicating, for instance, where in a fill-in form the user currently is, can help the user focus on the parts of the task they are currently working on. Temporal cues indicating where in a process or sequence of subtasks the user currently is. This way of depicting the steps in a process is becoming increasingly common in e-commerce sites. Attention grabbing versus helping the user to decide. It is all very well to design user interfaces with features that attract the user's attention in one way or another, but does this really contribute to the usability of the interface? A typical situation, which might be familiar to users of the web, is that the designer includes features that are likely to attract their user's attention, presumably because the designer felt that certain parts of the interface or certain pieces of information were especially important. If you are a designer, this might seem quite easy to do. Simply decide what you want the user to look at and make it larger than surrounding elements of the interface. Or make it more brightly colored, or make it move, or flash. If you really feel that the item is very important, for example, if it's an advert for a product the user hadn't yet realized they wanted to buy, then use all of these techniques together and include a large, attractively colored animated graphic in the interface. Surely, the user will be virtually unable to take their eyes off the graphic and will soon forget what it was that they originally came to your site for. Actually, if this technique does work at all and the user's attention is captured, they are likely to find it distracting and annoying. Users are likely to stop using the site and choose a different one that allows them to carry out their task without being bothered animations and so forth. A better alternative might be to accept that the user might be best placed to decide what is important and what is not for purposes of the task that they are trying to accomplish. The design should therefore try to support users in identifying what possibilities the interface is offering them, assessing their importance and relevance, selecting an appropriate alternative, and remaining focused on their task without unnecessary distractions. In any case, recent research suggests that crude attempts to attract web users' attention are less than successful. A study in which eye tracking technology was used to find out where website users direct their gaze showed that users tend to prefer looking at text and avoid looking at images and animations, even when the graphics contained useful information. A finding that suggests that users have become habituated to web designers' tricks and have trained themselves to overcome basic physiological and psychological responses, so as to ignore web features they imagine to be superfluous. This tends to indicate that banner advertising and other attempts to encourage their user attend to things that may not be relevant to their interests and intentions may be far less effective than designers would like to believe. It should be emphasized that this research finding is specific to the users of particular kinds of website and cannot necessarily be generalized to other settings and other kinds on user interface. Of course, if the user interface emphasizes nothing in particular or makes everything look equally eye-catching, then it is failing to help the user to decide what to do. There are sometimes situations where it is useful or even vital to distract the user from what they are currently doing and encourage them to think about something else instead. These include situations where safety is at stake, such as the aircraft example described earlier, as well as more everyday systems. In deciding what to emphasize and make more available, web page designers can often find out from server access logs which parts of a site are the most popular. The site can then be redesigned so as to make it easy for the user to focus on the most popular information and links. Memory. A further aspect of human psychology that is highly pertinent to the design of user interfaces is the study of memory, that is, how we are able to store and remember information that is relevant to the computer systems we use and the tasks we use them for. Every activity we engage in involves the use of our memories in one way or another. Not only is memory used in processing every input we receive from our senses, but also memory is essential for the fleeting, temporary, or intermediate thoughts that are part of just about every task we carry out. At the opposite end of the spectrum, we continually need to remember facts we have learned previously about the world we live in and the computer systems we use in order to make decisions and carry out actions. Even when we are not aware that we are remembering things, we probably are. Skills that we acquire are often performed without conscious thought, but still require us to recall remembered abilities. Memory is just as central for an expert cyclist or a proficient typist who may not be conscious of remembering the skills they have acquired as it is for someone trying to recall facts during an examination who may be painfully aware of their attempts to remember or failures to do so. Failing to remember can result in a number of possible errors in carrying out tasks. The kind of lapse or error of forgetting mentioned in the attention section, which can lead to us omitting part of a task or carrying out the wrong task, is one example of this. An HCI-related example here would be failing to save a document before quitting a word processor, or failing to bookmark a website before quitting the browser. Another effect of failing to remember is when we simply cannot recall how to carry out a task at the time when we need to, or fail to recall some important fact about the workings of the computer system. An example is if we are unable to recall the meanings of visual elements of a user interface. See if you can recall the meanings of each of the icons on this toolbar from a popular word processing program. Some of the meanings are easy. The icon that looks like a printer invokes the print command, but others are more difficult. What is the meaning of the icon to the right of the printer? A potentially more damaging instance of much the same phenomenon is if we misremember facts about the computer system or tasks we wish to perform with it. For example, if we incorrectly recall the meanings of the icons on the title bars of Windows, we can end up quitting an application and losing work rather than simply minimizing a window. The psychology of human memory. Psychological studies have revealed several types of memory system have a role to play in human cognition, each with its own specialized function and its own properties. Central properties that distinguish these types of memory are the capacity or size of the store, the decay time or the time for which items will persist before being forgotten, and the time it takes to recall or access items. Three classes of memory that psychologists have studied extensively are sensory memory, short-term or working memory, and long-term memory. The diagram extracted from the model human processor of Card, Moran, and